Hi, this is John St. Clair, and we're in the office of Dr. Norah Hooper of the University of Mary Washington College of Graduate and Professional Studies. We've been chatting this afternoon about strategy instruction, and I've asked Dr. Hooper to give me a brief definition and a couple of examples of strategy instruction. Thank you very much for being with us here this afternoon, Dr. Hooper. Could you give us a definition and some examples?
I'm happy to be here to share this with you. I want to talk about the way strategy instruction can help students who have difficulty learning. These were mainly developed for students with disabilities. My field is special education, and most students learn relatively easily through reading and hearing information, and it kind of comes to them. Students with disabilities, though, by definition, don't learn that way. They have shown that they have failed to learn the regular way, and they need specialized kind of instruction in order to learn successfully. So some systematic ways have been set up that help them to learn. There are ways that we've all used to learn information, to remember things, things like various aspects of study skills. But recently, some researchers have developed some ways to make this more systematic, to organize information, and a big part of this is making this information visual, so that students who have more difficulty learning through hearing can see organized information in a visual format. There are a couple of examples of those that have been developed. One was developed by David Hirely, and it's called Thinking Maps. And what he did was he decided on 8 thinking processes and developed an organizer or a map for each of those processes. And they are not like the traditional graphic organizers because they're not something that have been developed by a teacher and given to a student. The students are taught to use these, and then they draw them themselves. So it's a way to make the thinking that they do become visual. For example, there are the different thinking processes are brainstorming is one, classifying information is another, sequencing information, cause and effect, comparing and contrasting, doing analogies, doing part to whole. And there's a map for each one of those. And the idea is to teach students to use these so that when they feel themselves using that process, being sort of metacognitive about what they're doing, then they know that the way to help them do this visually and organize it is to write a map. And a good example of that might be the processes we go through when we write a paper. So the first thing we do is sort of get down all the information we know, gather information. We get information and just before we decide what we're going to do with it. And the way to use that is a circle map, according to Hirely. So you put the topic in the middle, and then you write all the information you know around that. Then you draw a frame around that and put how you know it within the frame, what your sources are, where you got that information from. So you take your information and you kind of dump it in the circle map, and there it is in front of you. So then what's the next process you go through when you write a paper? Well, you need to organize that information. So if you're using a thinking map, you draw a tree map, which is basically like a family tree where you put a line, you put the topics across the top, and you write the information underneath it. So you decide what your categories are for the information, and you put the information within these categories. So you've categorized the information, and again, you have it in front of you. And then the third process of writing the paper would be, how do I put this together in a paper? What kind of sequence should be in? So you do a flow map, which essentially is just boxes with arrows between them, in which you take it here first. This is the first piece, this is the second, this is the third, and you can have sub-boxes under those. So that's just an example of how you could, a procedure that seems sort of not understandable and maybe not very organized in your brain can become organized through the use of a thinking map. Another program that's been used, that's been more heavily researched than the thinking maps were developed by Don Deschler at the University of Kansas. It's called the Strategic Construction Model. And he has done and his group have all kinds of relatively complex graphic organizers that help you process information. His big point for students with disabilities is that what you need to do is figure out what the big picture is. What's our main idea here? They call it watering up the curriculum instead of watering it down. They say, what is the main thing you want a student to know when let's say you meet them on the street 5 years from now? What do you want them to remember from your class? What's the nugget, the important thing? And they're saying, that's what we want students to know. That's what we want students with disabilities to know. If they're not going to remember a lot, let's get them to remember the big thing. So they have these organizers that keep pushing you to summarize, to get the so what, to get what does it all mean, to pull out a definition. And they have them in many different areas, and they have some that relate to people who are teaching courses. They have one called a course organizer. They have a unit organizer. They have a lesson organizer. And they force you to take your course and put it into one sentence. This is what it's all about. But then they also have you put the main questions. There's a place to put the competencies and the assignments that go with those. There's a place to put community principles you're going to do, and all of it's done on 2 pages. And I've done this with most of my courses in the past few years, and I go over this before I do the syllabus to give a big picture that tells what this course is all about and gives students a chance to give me input on what they expect to learn from the course and how they like to learn. And all this is done with an organizer. There are also organizers for the question, called a question exploration routine, where you take a question and you unpack that. There's one for, it's called a concept anchoring routine, where you take a concept you know and anchor it with a concept you haven't learned yet. And again, it pushes you to summarize, etc. So those are also very effective, and Deschler and his group have proved that they do improve student performance. They have been particularly both for students with disabilities and for kind of students who have not been identified but need help learning. So all these are ones that are good for all kinds of students. But if we can help our teachers or our students, it helps us help our students to learn more successfully as well.
Dr. Hooper, that's just fascinating. You are working in the education program here at Mary Washington, and here at the College of Graduate and Professional Studies, we also have an MBA program. And in the MBA program, the semesters are accelerated. They teach their courses in 8-week accelerated sessions. And sometimes, occasionally, a student is challenged to get all their learning accomplished. Do you think these techniques would be useful in an accelerated business class?
I do. I think that they would help students. It would push them to get the most essential information. It would help them organize the information so that it's accessible to them and that they can remember it more successfully. I think there are all kinds of possibilities in which we could adapt these to work with the business program.
Dr. Hooper, thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome.